Okay, thus far we studied specific incidences where um, judges basically came to the defense of Israel after Israel had gone into rebellion. They rescued them, and the last judge that we looked at literally took it 3 chapters. It was Samson. The rest of this book is kind of like an appendix. I remember when I was a kid, I used to read Mad Magazine. And so there was a book that they put out, and it said appendix, remove if rumbling. But that was a joke. You had to get it. Anyway, this is kind of an appendix to the book of Judges, the last 5 chapters. They're not in chronological order. In all likelihood, this event, either this event or the next event, takes place soon after Joshua had conquered some territory. We're going to look here about the Danites and how they had not conquered their territory, and now they're going to conquer territory that they really should not have conquered. This had to have occurred early on in the book of Judges. But here we see it at the end, because this and another instance set the tone as far as the spiritual condition of much of Israel during this time. And so we see here in chapter 17 the introduction of a man by the name of Micah. His name is Michayahu. That's how you pronounce it. The rest of the chapter, he's described as Micah, which is short, literally short for Michayahu, which means who is like the Lord. And so we see probably evidence of, for lack of a better term, religiosity on the part of he and his mother. So let's pick it up at the chapter, and I'll comment as we go along. Now there was a man from the mountains of Ephraim, whose name was Michayahu. And he said to his mother, the 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you, and on which you put a curse, even saying it in my ears, here is the silver with me. I took it. Now, you're a little boy or a little girl, and your mother or father curses because of something that you did, even though they didn't know that it was you who did it. How would that make you feel?
Rough.
Yeah. Yeah, it wouldn't.
Knowing your father or your mother, do you think that you would have responded the way that Micah did? Children assume that their parents love them.
He was probably scared to tell her that he did it.
Yeah, he did it. Maybe he was afraid of the curse.
Yeah.
So he admits that he took it. And this is her response. may you be blessed of the Lord, my son. So when he had returned the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother said, I wholly dedicated the silver from my hand to the Lord for my son, to make a carved image and a molded image. Now, therefore, I will return it to you. So in other words, she's saying, I was intending this for you in the first place. But she had designated for what he was going to use it. And he was going to use it to make a carved image. Now I see something wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, she says, may you be blessed of the Lord, my son. There was a level of religiosity on her part. She was probably encouraged by the fact that Micah was honest. But I think she has a confused understanding of God. What was the rule of thumb in terms of worship in those days?
Worship God and only God. That's it.
Well, these people were probably trying to honor God.
Mm-hmm.
But we've just studied Joshua, and Joshua came right after a series of books that we had read and studied.
Mm-hmm.
It was the Torah. And the Torah specified you were to worship God in only one place, where the Mishkan was, where the tabernacle was. And at that time, the Mishkan was probably in Shiloh, which is right near the border of the Jordan River, not far from there. That's where they'd set up camp. And that's where the Kohanim, the priests, offered worship to God, the sacrificial system. And so time has passed. We don't know how much time, but these people had become religious. They sought to serve God, but they sought to serve God in ways that God had not prescribed. Amen?
Yeah, they want to worship their way.
Where does that leave us today?
Same.
Yeah,
Same.
That's why it's imperative to study Torah. By knowing it, by rehearsing it, reviewing it, God's standards hadn't changed. Am I saying that God is a legalist? No, you're not saved by observing Torah, but it pleases Him. But over and above that, it is God's way of saying, this is how you are to live your life so that you can be happy, so that you can thrive. And what do? We choose to do things our own way.
yeah,
So in all likelihood, we see here Micah taking the silver, melting it, creating images probably not too different from those found in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle in Shiloh, thinking that he can set up his own little tabernacle where he lives.
yeah,
But that's not God. That's not what God wanted. And we're going to see this man, Micah. He's going to wind up collaborating or basically, he's going to wind up as a victim of the tribe of Dan. And Dan is going to become the first tribe to worship God, but to worship God in their own way. And God don't like that. It's interesting too, that fire that's built, that was used for the altar, for burning, for the consumption of the lambs and the bulls and the oxen and the goats, that fire was started by God. As we recall, lightning came down from heaven and started it and consumed the initial sacrifice. What is going to light the fire of the sacrifices that are going to be created by the tribe of Dan? They didn't have matches in those days, but they probably sure did rub two sticks together. So the fire in Shiloh had been consecrated. The whole tabernacle had been consecrated as having come from God. And here we see an effort to worship God in our own way. And we see that today.
Yeah.
And our prayer ought to be, Lord, where I am wrong, correct me. So she commends her son for being honest. Then his mother took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to the silversmith, and he made it into a carved image and a molded image. And they were in the house of Micah. The man Micah had a shrine. He built his own church. And made an ephod. An ephod would be what we saw. We saw Gideon building and creating an ephod. And interestingly enough, it was because of a continuous fight that we recall that was going on between Gideon and Ephraim, and the tribe of Ephraim. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
So he built an ephod, and that was okay, although Gideon was obligated to go down to Ephraim, where Shiloh was, and the tabernacle. But because of this conflict, he was reluctant to go, so he built his own ephod. The ephod was the front garment of a Kohen, a priest. And he built out household idols. And he consecrated one of his sons, who became his Kohen, his priest. So Micah is creating his own religion. He's trying to worship God, but he's trying to do it in his own way. And he points out, in those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And I can't think of anything doing anything more right in your own eyes than creating your own religion. Now there was a young man from Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite. Well, that's where the Kohanim came from. The priests came from the Levites. And he was staying there in Bethlehem. The man departed from the city of Bethlehem in Judah to stay wherever he could find a place. I guess he was on a mission trip. Then he came to the mountains of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, as he journeyed. And Micah said to him, "Where do you come from?" So he said to him, "I am a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, and I am on my way to find a place to stay." Micah said to him, "Dwell with me and be a father and a Kohen to me." That is a priest to me. Being a father, he would be like a spiritual father. And because he was a Levite, this, Micah said, "Oh, look at what I've got. I've got a regular Levite." This reinforces my perception that the religion I'm following is right. And how often do we look for our circumstances to determine the decision we made, whether it was a right decision or wrong decision? And we might look at our circumstances to justify it. Again,
Yes,
I'm going to take Hannah home. Able to stay here with you?
yes,
Thank you.
again, the only thing that justifies our decisions is Torah. And it's interesting to look back at that phrase. In those days, there was no king in Israel. But there was a king. It was Adonai, God himself. He'd created the law. He had dictated. But, we need a human king to put our passions in check. Let's move on. He says, "Dwell with me, and I will give you 10 shekels of silver per year, a suit of clothes, and your sustenance." Sounds like a good deal. So the Levite went in. Then the Levite was content to dwell with the man, and the young man became like one of his sons to him. So Micah consecrated the Levite, and the young man became his Kohen, his priest, and lived in the house of Micah. And Micah said, "Now I know that the Lord will be good to me, since I have a Levite as a Kohen." We see here that his way of thinking was justified by his circumstances. Chapter 18.
Well, hey, Micah was looking when he saw that this man was a Levite. He thought that his actions was going to be blessed because he was a Levite. Is that correct?
Right.
How about that?
But I think it also gave credence to the new religion he created. He had created his own tabernacle.
Right.
And so now he has an authentic Levite with him. well, this is going to be a blessing. So I think you're right, Doug. I think he now assumes that everything is going to be okay because the Levite is with him. We're going to discover that that's not the case.
Yeah.
And again, we see here repeated in verse 1 of chapter 18. In those days, there was no king in Israel. And in those days, the tribe of the Danites, was seeking an inheritance for itself to dwell in. For until that day, their inheritance among the tribes of Israel had not fallen to them. Now, we saw Samson was a Danite. At that time, the Danites had probably possessed land over north of what we would call Gaza, on the coast of the Mediterranean. And that's what had been designated to them by Joshua, but they were never able to conquer it. And they had a lot of trouble with the Philistines, in spite of the presence of Samson. So they took the easy route. And what did they do? They moved. So children of Dan sent 5 men of their family from their territory, men of valor from Zorah and Eshtaol, to spy out the land and search it. Now, Eshtaol, if I am correct, and I could be wrong, is a very, very fertile place. If I am correct, it was probably used for farming grapes. So they're leaving this land to go to another land. In fact, it probably was undoubtedly very fertile, because we recall, even from our experience with Samson, what did Samson do? He tied fire to the tails of foxes and destroyed the corn of the Philistines. He had approached the vineyard of the Philistines. This is all fertile land. They had never conquered it from the Philistines. And so they decide to move. So they said, go search. They sent out 5 spies, and they said to them, go search the land. So they went to the mountains of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and lodged there. While they were at the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. They knew him. They turned aside and said to him, who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? What do you have here? He said to them, thus and so Micah did for me. He has hired me, and I have become his Kohen, his priest. So they said to him, please inquire of God that we may know whether the journey on which we go will be prosperous. They wanted prosperity, but they didn't want the will of God. And the Kohen said to them, go in peace, the presence of the Lord be with you on your way. What gave the Kohen the authority to say that?
I don't think he searched God first, okay? He didn't ask him first. He didn't go into the temple where he's supposed to be.
Right. There was also an element that the high priest had, which was Urim and Thummim, which were kind of like dice, where God could give a yes or a no answer. He didn't have those. He just said, go. What do you think inspired him to say that?
Self.
Himself? Is that
Yes.
what you said?
That
Self. Pride.
and he might have felt like they were strong enough to overcome the other people.
Well, that's true, although I don't think he ever ran into the other people. I don't even think he'd only traveled up this far to the mountains of Ephraim. Dan is where they're going to wind up is way further north. So he'd never been there. It reminds me of the time I parked my car. You ever been? Neither of you have ever been to Chicago. Have you, Doug? I parked my car on State and Madison, which is the busiest corner in Chicago, and they had parking meters on the street, and right by the parking meters they had no parking signs. So I went to an officer came walking by, and I said to him, "Can I park here or can I not park here?" And he said, "I don't care."
Go ahead and park there. I'll give you a ticket.
I got a ticket.
Wishy-washy.
So I think that this is kind of the answer that we got from Micah. And probably he's appealing to the thought or the perception that he's a holy man. This week, I ran into a situation where God really just knocked me down. I wound up, I spent the whole week studying scripture, meditating, praying, and I came to the Lord and emptied myself completely out to him. I don't know how I could get any deeper with him. I think that when you have a relationship where the Lord is you're willing to let the Lord knock you off your feet and recognize your complete and total dependence on him, maybe then you have the authority to say something. I don't see that in Micah. I don't see that in the Kohen, in the priests. I think that they are flippant about their religion. So they said to him, verse 5, "Please inquire of God that we may know." And he said to them, "Go in peace. The presence of the Lord will be with you on your way." So the 5 men departed and went to Laish. Now that's way up north. It's north of the Galilee. They saw the people who were there, how they dwelt safely in the manner of the Sidonians. Now, who are the Sidonians? Sidon was, I think it's north of Tyre. It was very prosperous. They relied a lot on fishing and trade. And they were relatively secure and independent. And there was a colony that had expanded out of that Sidonian environment. And they were more or less on their own. And they were living relatively tranquil lives. This reminds me of another instance in Torah where Moses sent out 12 spies. And the spies came back and said, oh, the land is terrific, but we can't defeat these people. They're giants. And here we're seeing the exact opposite. The Danites go up to Laish, and these people, man, they're easy to take. We might as well capture them. And God had never instructed them to do so. They saw the people who were there, how they dwelt safely in the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and secure. All they wanted to do was be left alone. And again, we see, and this is going to be pretty much throughout these last chapters of the book of Judges, there were no rulers in the land who might put them to shame for anything. I don't know who that's talking about. Could it have been the Sidonians? Could it have been the Danites? I checked some commentaries. The commentaries didn't seem to know either. One thing that a king will do, or an authority figure will do, would be to hold you responsible for behavior. We look at, I think, where's it? One of the Petrine epistles, where he says, or Paul says, honor those in authority over you, because they are there to punish the wicked and reward the righteous. They're there to maintain order. And I guess that we human beings can't function, we certainly can't function without a ruler, without a government. But as was the case with Israel, we had our government. It was called the Torah. But we didn't obey it because we couldn't see the king. We felt that there was no sense of responsibility to him. And so these people from Laish were far from Sidonians, and they had no ties with anyone, since they were defenseless. The spies came back to their brethren in Zorah and Eshtaol, and their brethren said to them, what is your report? So they said, arise, let us go up against them. We have seen the land. Indeed, it is very good. Would you do nothing? Do not hesitate to go and enter to possess it. When you go, you will come to a secure people and a large land, for God has given it into your hands, a place where there is no lack of anything that is on the earth. I remember as a young believer, there was a lot of tendency on the part of individuals to say, God told me this, God told me that. I have a friend who said to a girl, God told me that I'm supposed to marry you. And she immediately ran from him. We have to be very careful when we say that God told me this, God told me that. Verse 11. And 600 men of the family of the Danites went from there, from Zorah and Eshtaol, armed with weapons of war. Then they went up and encamped in Kiryat Yearim in Yehuda, in Judah. Therefore they call that place Mahaneh Dan. To this day, Mahaneh means encampment. That's where they encamped the army. There it is west of Kiryat Yearim. And they passed from there to the mountains of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah. Then the 5 men who had gone to spy out the country of Laish answered and said to their brethren, do you know that there are in these houses an ephod, household idols, a carved image, and a molten image? Now therefore consider what you do, what you should do. So they turned aside there and came to the house of the young Levite man, to the house of Micah, and greeted him. The 600 men armed with their weapons of war, who were of the children of Dan, stood by the entrance of the gate. Then the 5 men who had gone to spy out the land went up. Entering there, they took the carved image, the ephod, the household idols, and the molten image. The Kohen stood at the entrance of the gate with 600 men who were armed with weapons of war. When these went into Micah's house and took the carved image, the ephod and the household idols and the molded image, the Kohen said to them, what are you doing? And they said to him, be quiet, put your hand over your mouth, and come with us. Be a father and a Kohen to us. Is it better for you to be a Kohen to a household of one man, or that you be a Kohen to a tribe and a family of Israel? So the Kohen's heart was glad, and he took the ephod, the household idols, carved the image, and took his place among the people. Was this Kohen loyal? He'd been hired by Micah. Was he loyal to Micah?
Mm-mm.
Was switching loyalties a sign of godliness? What we see here is evidence that by creating their own religion, they were turning on each other. They could no longer trust one another. God had laid out in the Torah, this shall be the high priest. Shiloh, which is the location of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, that's where you shall worship. I don't care how inconvenient it is. That's where you go to worship. And as far as the Levites go, They have been apportioned land among the various tribes. They were accountable to one another to determine where they were to live. Here was a Cohen. He goes out on his own. He does his own thing. We see the tribe of Dan having been allotted land, but they can't win because they're not trusting God, essentially. They can't take the territory that had been given to them, so they go up north. And they do the exact opposite of what Israel did. They say, oh, God has given it to us because it's really easy to defeat these people. Sometimes God manifests his greatness by accomplishing great, if not impossible, tasks for us. Does that not make sense?
Yeah.
Should we be praying, God, find something really hard for me to do? I don't know about that. But I think that we ought to be praying, Lord, give me the wisdom to know your will. Speak to me. And if it's difficult, give me the strength and the desire to do it anyway. Notice the attitude of these 600 men, or the spies. Be quiet, put your hand over your mouth. In other words, shut up. We're in charge here. We've got the weapons. And of course, the Kohen was happy to go. And they turned and departed, verse 21, and put the little ones, the livestock, and the goods in front of them. When they were a good way from the house of Micah, the men who were in the houses near Micah's house gathered together and overtook the children of Dan. And they called out to the children of Dan. So they turned around and said to Micah, what ails you, that you have gathered such a company? So he said, you have taken away my gods, which I made. There you go. Gods of wood, hay, stone, stubble, silver, gold. And the Kohen, and you have gone away. Now what more do I have? How can you say to me, what ails you? It's like asking, oh, you're sick. It's not obvious. And the children of Dan said to him, do not let your voice be heard among us, lest angry men fall upon you, and you lose your life, along with the lives of your household. Then the children of Dan went their way, and when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his house. Micah had succumbed to bullies. The tribe of Dan were bullies. If Micah was a man of God who had not started his own religion, he literally could have confronted the entire tribe of Dan. He may have died in the attempt, but it might have been a lesson to the tribe of Dan. Any other thoughts on that? Verse 27. So they took the things Micah had made. idols made by human hands. And the Kohen who had belonged to him then went to Laish, to a people quiet and secure. Notice the repetition of that thought. And they struck them with the edge of the sword and burned the city with fire. There was no deliverer because it was far from Sidon. And they had no ties with anyone. It was in the valley that belongs to Beit Rehob. So they rebuilt the city and dwelt there. And they called the name of the city Dan, after the name of Dan, their father, who was born to Israel. However, the name of the city formerly was Laish. Then the children of Dan set up for themselves carved images. And Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, and his sons were Kohanes to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. So what happened? They've now begun their own religion. And
Wasn't Gershom blessed first?
what was that question?
Did not Jacob bless Gershom?
You're talking about
Manasseh?
he blessed Ephraim over Manasseh.
Okay. Wow.
Let's see, and just copy here.
He was the oldest, right?
I believe, as I recall, well, I believe that Manasseh was the oldest,
Mm-hmm.
but Ephraim became the more predominant one.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You know what, after we're through with this text, I'll get to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
So, we see that the tribe of Dan has set up their own religion. They've conquered a people who they knew they were mightier than. They weren't able to conquer people who were mightier than them, whom God could have conquered for them. And we see in chapter 7 of the book of Revelation that they're not even included among the 144,000, the 12 tribes of evangelists. They will participate in the last days, and we'll read about them in Ezekiel. But they've lost their testimony. They're worshiping the wrong God. They're worshiping a God of their own making. Ephraim seems to be a focal point of a lot of all this rigmarole that's going on. Chapter 19. Again, it came to pass in those days, and we don't know when this happened, because it was a long period, covered about 300 years in the book of Judges. This probably took place earlier on in the book of Judges, when there was no king in Israel. And we see that again. That there was a certain Levite staying in the remote mountains of Ephraim. Now, wait a minute. We saw another Levite. Didn't we just read about a Levite who was living in the in the territory of Ephraim.
Yep.
Actually came from Beit Lechem. So there was a proximity there to Beit Lechem. I believe Ephraim just bordered Judah, Beit Lechem being in Judah. He took for himself a concubine from Beit Lechem in Judah. But his concubine played the harlot against him and went away from him to her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah, and was there for 4 whole months. Then her husband arose. Now wait, was he her husband or was he her master? We really don't know, except that it seems that he treated her as a concubine. Arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back, having his servant and a couple of donkeys with him. So she brought him into her father's house. And when the father of the young woman saw him, he was glad to meet him. Wow. That's like, I've been having a relationship. I've been living together with a guy. I finally want you to meet him, Dad. That's not the way you do things. Now his father-in-law, the young woman's father, detained him, and he stayed with him 3 days. So they ate and drank and lodged there. So he's finally getting to know his father-in-law. Should have known him already. Verse 5. Then it came to pass on the 4th day that they arose early in the morning, and he stood to depart. But the young woman's father said to his son-in-law, refresh your heart with a morsel of bread, and afterward go your way. So they sat down, and the 2 of them ate and drank together. Then the young woman's father said to the man, please be content to stay all night, and let your heart be merry. And when the man stood to depart, his father-in-law urged him, so he lodged there again. Then he arose early in the morning on the 5th day to depart. But the young woman's father said, please refresh your heart. So they delayed until afternoon, and both of them ate. This reminds me of something. Remember when Abraham sent his servant Eliezer on a trip to go find a wife for Isaac. And he comes to the house of Rebekah. And Rebekah's brother, a guy by the name of Laban, who also happens to be the father of Leah and Rachel, who are the, what do you call it? Cousins and daughters of, they would be the nieces and nephews, the nieces of Isaac and Rebekah. So he goes to Rebekah's house. God had prepared this marriage. He had said, I specifically intend for Isaac to marry Rebekah because through this marriage, the children of Israel are going to be born, and I am going to create a nation which will be a testimony to the world. This was God's plan. This was God's intention. And Laban and his mother said, stay a while. And he said, and the servant said, no, I have to go back to my master. And it's interesting, the Hebrew implies stay a couple of days, or it could mean stay, it basically says stay 10. It doesn't say whether it's 10 days or 10 years. So we really don't know, except that we see Laban attempting consciously or otherwise to thwart the will of God. Eliezer had been sent on a mission. He has to follow it through. So then they say, well, ask the girl. Ask the young woman. And she says, I will go. She was eager to go. And you know what? I think I know why she was eager to go. She wanted to get out of that house. If Laban could have, the verbiage of Eliezer and the reality that Eliezer had demonstrated that he was the servant of Laban's cousin, that that was the only thing that kept Laban from looking at this treasure that he had brought with him to give to their household and to give to Rebekah. This reality that he was Abraham's servant made him hesitate to literally slit Eliezer's throat and just take it. Rebekah was eager to get out of that house. And here we see, and what happened? They stayed overnight and they left. They were on a mission to get Rebekah married to Isaac. What do we see here? They're on no mission for anything. They're just wandering around without a purpose. The marriage has not been sanctified. She's a concubine. And like Laban, the father says, stay a while. They say, okay. They're not on a mission. We'll stay. The wine is good. I like your cooking. See, okay, so tomorrow go your way so that you may get home. However, the man was not willing to spend the night. So he rose and departed. So they delay and they depart at an inconvenient time. He's wishy-washy. Well, I really want to get going. So they get going and it's already late in the day. And they came opposite of Yebus, which is Jerusalem. Now, who is living in Jerusalem?
Jebusites.
Right. Now, the Jebusites were Canaanites. They weren't part of Israel. And the Hebrew word for family is mishpacha, or mishpacha. In Yiddish, it's mishpacha. You know, I think I'd rather go be with my mishpacha. You know, we'll go where the family is. So they went and departed and came opposite Yebus, which is Jerusalem. With him were 2 saddled donkeys. His concubine was also with him. They were near Yebus, and the day was far spent. And the servant said to his master, "Come, please, and let us turn aside into the city of the Jebusites to lodge in it." But his master said to him, "We will not turn aside here into a city of foreigners, who are not of the children of Israel. We will go on to Gibeah." How easy it is to presume, you know, that because you're among your own ethnic group, you're going to be treated well. I think, well, to be honest with you, I don't think that is the case with Israel today, even. I used to think so, that I'd be among people of Israel or Jewish people. Oh, mishpacha, you're one of the family. I don't think, even before I became a believer, I began to think otherwise. So in verse 13, so he said to his servant, "Come, let us draw near to one of these places and spend the night in Gibeah or in Ramah." And they passed by and went their way, and the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belonged to Benjamin. They turned aside there to go in to lodge in Gibeah. And when he went in, he sat down in the open square of the city, for no one would take them into his house to spend the night. Just then, an old man came in from his work in the field at evening, who also was from the mountains of Ephraim. He was staying in Gibeah, whereas the men of the place were Benjamites. Now, this whole incident reminds me of something else. Anybody have an idea?
Lot?
Yep. Angels, Malchim, came to Sodom. No one would let them in. In reality, they didn't want anybody to let them in. Lot said, "Come into my home." But was Lot from Sodom?
No. He was
was
a shepherd.
Right. He was a wanderer. He was a ger. He was a sojourner. And so we see here a man from Gibeah who wasn't a Benjamite. And he's the only one in the town who's going to offer hospitality to this man, this Levite, and his concubine. Do you think that there's a tendency on the part of natives in a location to be less hospitable than newcomers? I'm just curious.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, I don't know.
I don't know either. But we see that here. Verse 17. And when he raised his eyes, he saw the traveler in the open square of the city. And the old man said, where are you going and where do you come from? Verse 18. So he said to him, we are passing from Bethlehem in Judah toward the remote mountains of Ephraim. I am from there. I went to Bethlehem in Judah. Now I am going to the house of the Lord. And so we see here that the house of the Lord, which would have been the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was in Ephraim, which would have been, I'm pretty confident, Shiloh. But there is no one who will take me into his house. Although we have both straw and fodder for our donkeys, and bread and wine for myself, for your female servant, and for the young man who is with your servant, there is no lack of anything. And the old man said, peace be with you. However, let all your needs be my responsibility. Only do not spend the night in the open square. So he brought him into his house and gave fodder to the donkeys, and they washed their feet and ate and drank. Well, I think we're going to stop here because, let's see where we are here. Yeah, let's stop here in the middle of the verse, and we'll, in the middle of the chapter, and we will pick it up next week. Read it in advance. Give me your impressions. You're familiar with it already. Any insights, any questions, any comments?
He's
Well,
hospitality. He's practicing hospitality.
mhm.
Yep, that's what that man was doing. And that's
And
something that we should be doing.
yeah, this is kind of like Abraham too. The three guys, or the three people came to his tent. He
Mhm.
invited them in, and
Mhm.
it was just a Jewish practice, wasn't it?
Yeah, more or less. We're going to see otherwise from the. It was supposed to be Jewish practice. I don't know about you, but I think that the Kohen, this Levite, would have been better off if he had stayed over in among the Jebusites in Jerusalem. This was supposed to be a practice of Torah, to be
Mhm.
hospitable. But
Do
we're
you
living
think
in a
that
time.
this? Do
Go
you
ahead.
think this old man was very kind, and even though he lived with wicked people, just like
I
Lot
think
was very kind and very gracious, even though he lived in a wicked town?
right. I think that our task, Jesus said to us, be in the world, but not of it. He calls us to be holy because he is holy. John put it very nicely today. He said, God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. None of us can be any of those things. But he does call us to be holy because God is also not only omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent, but he is also holy. He's separated from the people of the world. And we are to be too. That doesn't mean that we're not to be relating to them. It means that we're not to be like them. And we can be like them even by being judgmental. Let's say, let's say you're against drinking and you see them drinking. Oh, you're bad. what can they, what, they're not accountable to God. They haven't made any of a kind of a commitment to God. Our task is to share how good God is. And if drinking would cause them to stumble, then we don't drink in their presence. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yep.
So Lot made the wrong choice. He went and lived in Sodom. And he went and lived there probably for very much the same reason that the Danites went and moved up to Laish. It was fertile and it was easy to access. Look at what happened to Sodom. Became the Great Salt Lake. The greatest salt lake.
You're talking about the Dead Sea?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was a fertile valley. Beautiful, lush and green. With I don't know what kind of fruit it had. But it was beautiful. And then Sodom was destroyed. And it turned into ash. And remnants of Sodom are somewhere probably underneath that water.
Wow. Wow. I didn't know that. Hmm.
Well, like, haven't the archaeologists found some relics that were there that that shows them that that's where it was?
I'm not sure of that. I do have a picture somewhere in my archives of a pillar of salt that does seem to indicate that maybe Lot's wife is in there somewhere.
Yeah.
So I'm going to let's see, I'll turn off the what do you call it? As soon as I can figure out how to do it. Let's stop the share and let's stop the recording.